Okay, welcome everyone. I'm so excited for this gardening with young children webinar with Rena Zampiero tonight from Audubon. Rena, you'll introduce yourself, right? So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Dinah Mack. I'm the Education Program Manager with Massachusetts Farm to School. And thanks everyone who's introducing themselves in the chat. Seems like we have a great diverse group of locations coming in. So we're really excited for this series of program with Rena that we get to collaborate with. And I'm going to let Rena introduce herself and we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you all. So glad to be here and to be working with Mass Farm to School on this joint endeavor here. It's really exciting and to see so many people from all over. Please feel free to both continue to put in the chat where you're from and what age groups you work with. Also looking for you to share any early experiences you may have had with gardening or growing or even eating fresh food from the gardens. Loved seeing what Tina shared that used to work with your dad in his three gardens, and that one was always designated for you to experiment with. That is so beautiful. And that's a lot about what we're going to be talking about with young children. And it's not always going to be a success when you're growing something. You may get what you are hoping for, and you may not, but it is all about experimentation with the kids and giving them ownership of it. So that's amazing. Um, just a couple other cool things popping up here in the chat. I see that Nancy, her grandfather was a gardener in Long Island. Awesome. Tomatoes, zucchini flowers that got stuffed. Ooh, delicious. And growing squash long john that were taller than his grandchildren. That is impressive. Can't say I've ever seen those before. Catherine shares early experiences with growing, harvesting, and eating produce from California and been involved in gardening all your life and loving the sensory piece. Beautiful. So definitely keep tossing those in and hopefully they'll get us super excited for this workshop series. All right, so hopefully you all are aware that you are here for our Kids in the Garden series. This is actually a 4-part workshop series we're going to be offering through Mass Farm to School. So we hope you can join us for more of the workshops. This first one we call Garden to Classroom. And it's kind of your basic intro into what is farm to early childcare, what are the different pieces of it, and how do you start dipping your toes. But we really will get really in depth as we move through the rest of the workshops. And as Dinah introduced me, my name is Rena Zampiero. I am the statewide early education manager for Mass Audubon, which means that I have a 2-part job. One is that I get to oversee and coordinate the efforts of our 7 licensed nature preschools across Massachusetts. But a lot of the work I do is with early educators like yourselves that want to learn more about how to incorporate nature-based and garden-based learning into your classrooms. So that's what we're here to do today. Right. So I always like to start with just a very quick introduction to Mass Audubon for those of you not familiar with us. We are the longest continually running Audubon society in the country, older than National Audubon. And yes, we are rather proud of that. Formed by 2 women who were appalled by the fact that people were sticking dead birds on their head and calling it fashion. Since the very beginning of our organization, in addition to all of the conservation and advocacy work that we do, we've been incredibly dedicated to education. And that started right with our 2 founding mothers who went straight into the public schools in Boston and started recruiting junior members because we know the incredible impact that working with young children has and those lifetime relationships that we can build. So across Massachusetts, we have more than 60 wildlife sanctuaries, everything from Cape and the islands all the way west to Pittsfield and everywhere in between. So if you're in the state of Massachusetts and you haven't gotten to visit one of us, you definitely should check us out. We have more than 21 of those sanctuaries have actual nature centers, so staffed buildings where you can come and take programs and learn all about nature and gardening with your kids. And then, as I said, we have we currently have 7 licensed nature preschools serving over 200 children and their families across the state, many of which do gardening in addition to nature-based learning. So this is something we've had the opportunity to explore, try out, fail, and succeed as we've gone through that learning process with our students and our teachers. And then early childhood, what is Mass Audubon doing with young children? And the answer is lots. We work with our nature-based preschools, but we also do a lot of preschool programs. I was actually just out in Holyoke today with a Head Start school teaching them about maple sugaring, which was so much fun. We had a blast. So we do a lot of programs in school systems. We do a lot of programs with young families. And then, of course, we work with educators like yourselves to kind of build that excitement for incorporating nature into your school. And it's all because, as you already know, the impact you're having right now with our youngest learners is so meaningful. You are building lifelong relationships with adults, with children, with the world. And so we really want to start from the beginning and make sure that children feel empowered and creative and excited and comfortable with nature, so that hopefully they grow into older children and adults that want to care about nature and take a role in it. And then lastly, why farm to early childcare? It's actually a relatively new thing that schools have actually started thinking on the pre-K level of how do we actually do farm to school. It's been a relatively big movement over the years, but only recently they were saying, hey, maybe we should do this with young children. And there are so many reasons why. I did borrow this from Shelburne Farm and Vermont Feed. Excellent resource if you want to learn more about farm to early childcare. But it's all about we want to enhance the quality of our early childhood programs. We want to reach all the different learning and programmatic standards, which we'll talk about a lot next week in our curriculum workshop. Um, Farm to early childcare is a great way to engage families and communities, right? Through food, through growing, through sharing communal recipes and meals together. It's a huge part of supporting a child's development and also helping them to feel like their culture and their family values are being respected within the school. It promotes healthy eating and wellness behaviors. We know that starting with eating fruits and vegetables at a young age creates a lifelong pattern of eating healthy foods. We're working towards advancing racial and social equality around access to healthy food and local food. And again, trying to develop that next generation of responsible food eaters that want to create a more equitable food system going forward. All right, now that we got all the details out of the way, let's get into some of the fun meat of the context here. And so, first of all, when I'm thinking about farm to school, there's so many different directions your brain can kind of go into. And so I like to follow the practice set out by the Northeast Farm to School Institute, which breaks farm to school up into 3 C's. And those C's are classroom, cafeteria, and community. So thinking about the classroom piece, that's really where the curriculum comes in. So all the curriculum that you can create and do with your children around planting, growing, harvesting, caring for, cooking, eating, knowing where it comes from, cultural food tie-ins can all come through that classroom piece, so that curriculum piece there. Then there's the cafeteria piece. That's how do we get some of these fresh and local foods into our meals, into our snacks, introducing new flavors and new tastes. And I know many early education programs do not have a meal plan where they are actually providing daily meals, but we can always do taste tests and snacks. There's always ways to get some of that cafeteria piece into the classroom with the children. And then lastly, the third C is community. So how are we going to use farm to school as a way to engage our preschool community, including all of the families and extended families of our students, as well as our local community of grocery stores, farmers, beekeepers, chefs in restaurants. So how are there, and then of course, moving all the way up through the policymakers, right? How do we connect with our community around food and food education? So those are our 3 C's. So, what I would like us to do, and we're going to have to get just a little creative here because we're not so easy to break up into groups. So, we'll do this a little more individually. But what I would like you to do is to think for a moment about either some kind of activity you have done around farming, gardening, cooking, growing. And then I want you to think out, where does that activity fit? Do you see that activity that you did as a piece of curriculum, that classroom piece? Was it a cafeteria piece where people were really eating healthy foods, or was it part of the community growth? And I know some things will overlap, and that's okay, but I kind of am curious to see where you think it might fit. So I am going to toss the Padlet link up here so that you can click on it. But once you kind of have one or two ideas in your head, just click on that link and then put a note under one of the three categories. And you'll see in that Padlet, I'm going to open it up too. So I'm going to give you, let's give you maybe 3 minutes to start popping some things into that Padlet. If anyone isn't able to reach it for any reason, drop me a note in the chat, please.
And if you haven't used Padlet, when you open it up, you'll see a little plus. Just click on the plus sign and it'll open a little like a post-it, and then you can write something on there. And then you
Yeah,
hit
and you'll be
submit.
able to see there's already 3 headers. So there's classroom, cafeteria, and community, and just click the plus under the one you feel your activity belongs in. Great. I'm starting to see things popping up already. Awesome ideas in here.
And I see, Rena, I see that someone put Harvest of the Month under cafeteria, and I'm just going to do
Mhm.
a shameless plug while in the chat that Mass Farm to School has a Harvest of the Month for Educators program. So if you're an educator and you're interested, I'm just putting a Harvest of the Month for Educators sign up in the chat. We have elementary and secondary, and next fall we're going to have early childhood, and you get a
I
monthly
know we're very
newsletter.
excited to potentially be working on that. I've been talking to a few people about that. So I will also say, Dinah, that I just picked up a recipe from your Harvest of the Month that I'm going to use with my classroom in Springfield. We're going to try the kale apple salad.
Oh,
So nice.
delicious.
And I just learned that you have to massage your kale if you put it in a salad, unless it's baby kale. So I'm going to have to massage the lettuce, the kale in front of the kids. Should be very entertaining.
I think they'll enjoy giving a little massage.
They might. I'm not entirely sure I trust how clean their hands are, but we're going to try.
Yeah.
They're going to do all the leaf ripping. It's good.
All
All
right.
right, so I'm just going to
Great
start reading
ideas.
some of these out here. So let's see. Under classroom, I see we've got growing tomatoes, gardening, including hydroponics. That's so much fun. Getting to try herbs and learning about where they come from, how they're used, and how a child would use them and has experienced them before. I love that. And Ariel, I would say that that probably goes under all 3 of them, right? Getting to taste, getting to learn about growing, and then also that community piece of how they've experienced them before. Growing basils and other herbs, growing different fruits and veggies, planting seeds in the school garden. Ooh, tomatoes are a popular crop here. Wow. Doing baking projects in the classroom. Again, that's cafeteria and classroom. Farm to market. Love it. Teaching kids where the food comes from. More tomatoes. Wow. Sensory jars from parts of garden plants. Oh, Jenny, you're going to have to give me more info on that because that sounds amazing. And drying flowers and seed saving. Love that, Lydia. And then let's see, in cafeteria, I see we've got Harvest of the Month, healthy snacks, eating tomatoes, cucumber salad. I love the taste tests. I do it all the time. Ooh, and someone's doing kimchi. Meg, that's really ambitious. I love it. And then in our community piece, so we've got salsa gardens that got the seeds got given out to the community. So neat. 30 plant challenge. The students spent 7 days recording all the plants and plant-based foods they eat. The challenge was to get 30 different ones in 7 days. Wow, Tina, I love that idea. How fun is that? All right, local libraries having seeds to grow. That's great. Community events with local restaurants, grocery stores, cooking demos, and gardening. Clearly, Kathy's got this all figured out. Meg, ordering culturally important seeds from our community gardens. Absolutely, Meg. We're definitely going to be talking more about that. And tree planting, Narissa. That's really neat. So I love the ideas that are popping up in here. Feel free to keep changing them. You might notice that the one that is the most full right now is the classroom piece, which I am not surprised about. As early educators, like curriculum is our bread and butter, right? That is where we really shine, where we really excel. And, if that's what excites you, definitely come next week for our one focused on curriculum and the ways in which gardening and growing can fit in. but it may be tricky for us as early educators to kind of figure out where does it fit into the cafeteria piece and where does it fit into the community piece. And so those are two things that we'll talk about in workshop 3 and 4, because they can be a little bit tricky. You're right. The cafeteria piece, especially, I know how hard it can be to cook with young children, right? That's an adventure, hence the kale salad that we're going to be trying out. But there are some ways to do it that make it so much easier. And also the community piece is just huge, and all the different ways that we can really um, make informed choices through the interests and the requests of the community, and what things are important to them and what they're excited to share and what they want us to include as part of the curriculum. So thrilled to have all those awesome ideas there. All right. So I'm curious to hear from any of you, in your experiences, you know, which types of farm to school or 3C activities feels like the most challenging to you? I know for me as an early educator for a long time, the cooking piece was really hard for me, and I kind of had to explore that. Oops, I'm sorry. But I'm curious to hear in the chat from all of you, where do you feel like you want more support? What areas are tricky for you?
Rena, is it easy for you to read the chat or do you want me to read it
Yep,
out?
it's actually totally easy because I have my second screen going, so I can see it
Okay.
all. Just catching up on some of these amazing stories here. So Ariel is saying that creating the garden-based lesson plans can be tricky. So one thing we're going to talk about next week, Ariel, if you're able to attend, is we're literally going to look at all the different developmental domains, and how gardening and growing and cooking fit into all of those. So for example, you may feel like, oh, well, garden's easy to do if I have to do a science activity, but where does it fit with language and literacy? And where does it fit with fine and gross motor and all those other areas of development? We're going to walk through step by step each of those areas with a whole bunch of ideas. So we can definitely support some of that garden-based lesson plans. Um, Finding the right curriculum to meet the DESI CHPE standards, that could be tricky, Catherine. And I have to say, I'm not as familiar with the CHPE standards, but I have a feeling that I can probably find someone who could help with that. So if you want, feel free. My email will be at the end of this, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll see if I can connect you with someone that could help more with that. Um, Carolyn is interested in community. How do we get homeschoolers to participate in a community garden? That's a great question, Carolyn. We'll definitely talk about that in our 4th workshop, all about community tie-ins. But I love that you're working with homeschoolers, and that gives you so many different opportunities to really get children and their families engaged. And Meg says as well, family engagement. Oh, many parents don't know anything about their school's gardens. Well, this is an excellent way to learn about how to cue them into that. Nancy says the cafeteria piece, getting them to allow any foods that are not from the food service company. Yeah, that one can be tricky. Composting, reducing food waste. Um, I may be speaking out of turn here, but I'm guessing that some of the mass farm to school what resources may also help with that. I don't have a ton of experience with the actual procurement of foods, but Dinah, is that something that mass farm to school has some resources on?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nancy, you could get in touch with us at Mass Farm to School to talk about procurement. We also have a couple of webinars on school-wide composting from people who have started composting systems. And we just had some students from the Springfield Renaissance School do a webinar about a food waste audit that they're doing across the district. And how they're getting their school to reduce food waste. So we cover all of those. So please get in touch. And I'm going to just put my email in the chat um, for anyone who has questions about anything.
And I love, we've got some more really good comments here. So Sarah says, where to start? We're going to show you exactly where to start. And the whole reason I asked Dinah to run this class now is because now's the time to start. So this is the perfect timing. This is exactly when you should be asking that question. And we're going to talk about how to do that. Also, you mentioned the how to share the responsibility in 4 classrooms. Yep, we have 6 classrooms once that were using the same space, and we had to get a little creative on that one. So we can definitely talk about how to share that and differentiating lessons for each age group. Um, yeah, definitely. And we'll talk about some different ages there. Community and summer maintenance, absolutely, Susan. If you're not a 12-month program, the summers are really tough because that's the time you want to be in the garden and your kids are out of session. So we can talk about some ideas for how to manage that summer piece. The short growing season, I feel you, Lydia. I'm even further north. I'm in southern New Hampshire, and my poor garden is a very short season. But we'll talk about starting things inside that can help grow the season, as well as managing when to plant what will help to extend your season there a little bit as well. Um, and there you go. Awesome. Garden maintenance. Definitely go to that one as well. That would probably help a lot. Great. Keep tossing them up there and we'll keep addressing them as we go. All right. So I just like to get us all, thinking a little bit. So, whether it was one of the activities you put in the Padlet or something else that you've done or you would like to do, just think a little bit about how you can build on that activity to make it culturally responsive or to support children with diverse or physical abilities or children with cognitive or developmental abilities. You don't have to do all 3 with the same activity, but I think it's always important to, when we're planning the activity, how are we going to make this activity more accessible? How are we going to make this activity relevant for everyone? So, an example of this I might do is, let's say that I was going to be making smoothies in one of my classrooms. If I wanted this activity to be more culturally responsive, I would make sure that I selected a wide variety of fruits and vegetables to put in the smoothie that might reflect common foods in different families and households. So I might include certain tropical fruits. I might include fruits that are indigenous to Asia, or fruits that you might find in Africa if I could find them at the store, or vegetables. I would try to think about different kinds of products that we could provide the children so that each of them could feel like there's something in there that is familiar to them, something that they might be using at home. If I was thinking, how would I make that more accessible for children with diverse physical abilities? Maybe I would have them, instead of cutting the fruit with kids safe knives, maybe I would give them berries that they could mush up in a Ziploc bag or with a potato masher so that they could use wherever they're at with their fine and gross motor skills to participate in a way that works for them. For cognitive or developmental abilities, maybe they could point to the picture of the fruit that they wanted to do. Or if you have a child who's very hesitant about trying new foods or different textures, you could let them try the individual ingredients, or just offer it to them, have it in front of them, but not be required trying. So, if you have any ideas that you want to toss into the chat about an activity you do and how you might adapt it for one of these 3 groups of individuals, that would be awesome. Let's see what you've got. It's also okay if this is an area that you don't yet have ideas on. That's totally fine. We're going to kind of develop these ideas as we go. So Catherine says, planning with the students, what is going to be planted? Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way both to be culturally responsive, because they may include fruits and vegetables or herbs and seasonings that you're not used to using that are familiar to them. It also could help with some of the cognitive and developmental pieces, if those are things they're comfortable eating, something familiar to them, as well as thinking strategically with physical abilities, right? It's much easier for a child with low muscle tone or low fine motor skills to plant a flower or garlic bulb than it is to plant a radish seed, right? They're very different in size. Um, Nancy says sensory plantings. Yes, beyond just the smell and taste, including hearing, Oh, I love that. Grasses in the breeze, textures, high raised beds for children who may not be able to be on the ground. Those are all great adaptations. Um, Having them pick choices or give them what they would like. Yeah, absolutely. Or even just picking what kind of dirt. Interesting. I like that. And remember, some of the children might really love the sensory piece of getting their hands in the dirt and getting really messy and having that full sensory experience. And other kids are going to be the complete opposite and are going to need gloves or tools or whatever they need to not touch the dirt at all. Right. So we have a whole spectrum of the different comfort levels of our students and learners. Give us just another minute or two, and then we'll go to the next slide. All right. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into each of the three C's, and each one will have an activity. And I forgot to mention ahead of time, but after this workshop, I'm going to send out some materials to Dinah, and she will send them along to all of you. And that is a completion certificate for the workshop that you can use for most EEC continuing ed credits. I'll also send out an activity write up. So any of the activities we do together in the workshops, I'll have them written up for you so you don't have to remember every detail of what we did because it'll all be written for you. And I do also have some different resource handouts. So after each of the workshops, you'll get an activity write up, a completion certificate, and then usually some kind of resource list as well. So hopefully you'll find those useful as we go along. All right. So
And
classroom.
Rena,
Yes, go ahead, Dinah.
we'll also be sending the webinar itself. So you'll see this as well if you want to share it.
Awesome. So you can watch me over and over again because I'm sure,
Yes,
you'll just have
forever.
a blast in your free time. All right, Lydia adds in, when we do activities that require focus and fine motor like seed saving, you also give them an option to choose to water or dig for worms or listen to the birds if they need a break for that. Options is huge. I love that. Definitely having different choices. All right, so classroom. So again, as I said before, classroom is any activity that has to do with planning, planting, caring for, visiting, harvesting for the garden, any kind of curriculum around that. It might be books, it could be an art activity, it may be a hands-on thing, it could be math, it could be literacy. There's so many different ways to tie in all of that learning component. Hopefully, at least some of this can occur outside, but I also understand that your schools are spread out both across the state and apparently well beyond the state, which is amazing. You may be in the middle of a city. You may have nothing but blacktop. You may have situations when you're not allowed to go outside. And I totally understand that. Growing can even be done indoors. Harvesting and growing and planting and all of this can be also accomplished indoors. So if that is where your program is at, there's still a way that you can do some of this learning even without getting outside. But if you're able to get outside, so much the better. And then definitely thinking about where does the food come from, thinking about the seasonality of plants, especially in a place like New England where we have such a short growing season, thinking about the different parts of plants and what parts of plants do we eat, and when we are eating, what part of the plant is something that we're consuming. What do living things need to grow? Healthy eating. There's so many different pieces in there that you can make a part of your curriculum. So this is just a few of the many incredible resources out there. This will all be on the resource list that I send out after this workshop, but I do like to at least reference everybody who's out there. So of course, I've got the Mass Farm to School Harvest of the Month. For those of you who are not in Massachusetts, many states have their own Harvest of the Month that's more relevant to what's growing in your area. So definitely check it out. Um, Kids Gardening is a great website, and you can sign up for their mailing list, and they have so much amazing information and workshops and discussion groups and things like that. Martha's Vineyard has Island Grown Schools that does a lot of really great resources, Edible Schoolyard. I love Shelburne Farm. They have some really nice, especially early ed based content out there. There's the National Farm to School Network. That's a whole country. And Growing Minds Farm to School is also a great one. So these are just a few of my favorites that are out there. All right, so let's get started with the curriculum piece. You all were asking, like, how do I get started? This is how we get started. We start by thinking with kids. Yes, I'm sorry, Sarah. Harvest of the Month. So, Harvest of the Month is a great program that every month features a particular, usually a vegetable or a fruit, but sometimes it's dairy or grains, or honey or maple syrup. And usually, as part of it, there is fun facts about it, suggested recipes, suggested curriculum. Um, Thank you, Dinah, for putting the link up in there. It's meant to be very complementary to what's going on in our environment right now. Currently, it's mostly geared towards educators and K through 12. We are working on one that's a little more focused on early ed, but there's still some incredible information out there that you can focus on and just gives you some good ideas on what you can do with that. Absolutely, Sarah. All right. So when you're starting to think about gardening, like right now, excellent time to do that, is what can you do with your space, right? Do you have huge open swaths of land that nobody cares if you dig a bunch of garden plots in? Awesome. Probably not. Are you entirely blacktop? Are you a combination of green space and concrete? Are you in an area that's shared with a lot of other places where you may not be able to set something up that's permanent? Are you on the fifth story of an office building and have very limited access to outside? So think about what you can do with your space. And the short answer is no matter what you have, you can do something. There are many different options out there for how to possibly do some gardening in your space with what you have. So for some of you, that might mean having planters, just movable pots, whether they are small little flower pots, big half rain barrels. They even have basically garden in a bag. And it is a very heavy duty canvas bag that you fill with dirt and you grow in it, which means it is 100% portable. And if you need to move it at some point in time, great. Same with the planters, right? You don't need something permanent set up. Raised beds happens to be my favorite way of gardening. That's what I have in my garden. Benefits of raised gardens are usually you can start planting them earlier because they are warmer. They're not set down into the ground level where the frost kind of holds on. Weeds are usually kept down a little bit. You can really improve soil quality. My soil right now is terrible, so I have to have raised beds and I put what I want in it rather than what I have on the ground. But raised planters are great. You can try planting straight in the ground. It's a lot less effort in setup than some of the other stuff. So there's a lot of different options. Think about what might work with the space that you have and the others that are using your area right there. Then what are the needs of your program? What are the goals of doing this? Is it, if this is a hugely shared space and you're going to have everything from infants and toddlers up through like 12th graders, you're going to need to think a little differently than what are we going to do if it's literally just, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in this space, or it's our space sometimes, but then it's also the church's space, or it's a community space, or it's a basketball court. So you do need to think about what's going to work within the unique elements of your program. Think about what might be available in terms of funding, right? The good news is there's actually a fair bit of, well, there's a lot of different types of sources out there of funding, which is great. I'm a big fan of the Mass Fresh grants. I've been able to work with several schools using grant funding from that. Certainly Mass Farm to School can help you find various funding sources, everything from, larger allocations that would enable you to, hire some new staff or work with consultants like Mass Audubon, or, set up a huge garden, to smaller programs that might fund literally just the building of a raised bed, or just the amount of money you need for seedlings. So there's a whole scope out there of money that might be available for you. And then I'm also thinking of your growing calendar, which, as we know in Massachusetts, is a little bit short, but we can get creative around that. Um, and also thinking about if your school is a 9-month school and your kids are done in June and they don't come back until September, trying to think about what can we grow that our kids are actually going to be around to eat versus planting things that are only going to be around in the summer when there's nobody here. So thinking a little strategically too about when are the kids here and can actually benefit from the things that we are growing. So we start now with the planning stages. We're in the planning stages. Hopefully, you as a teaching team can kind of problem solve some of the questions that you have here. Now we need to think about, all right, so let's do some planning. So you may want to plan with just your class. If you can have a little space that's just yours, even if it's one little planter, you may want to plan on a school-wide level. We quickly discovered at my school, we had 6 beds We were a 9-month program. So we all were like, well, I know, lettuce and radishes are first to get ready. So we literally had 6 beds of nothing but lettuce and radishes. Not exactly the most exciting selection. So we had to actually think, okay, let's think about this. One class can plant lettuce and radishes. This one might plant peas and we can eat the pea tendrils. This one may be thinking ahead and planting things that are going to be ready in the fall, like pumpkins. So we had to kind of work as a team, even though each of us had our own beds for the classroom, so that we actually had a whole plan for the school and didn't just wind up with 30 million radishes. You may want to involve input from your families and your local growers. Families may have ideas of things that they really like growing. They may be doing their own seed starting and have extras that they don't mind sharing. It's also great to talk to local growers. If you don't know what's going to grow well in your soil, in your neighborhood, in your part of the state, talk to the local growers and find out for them, or ask them what are some of the more popular varieties of things, or what things are hardier with challenging weather or more forgiving of lots of love from young children, um, or less bitter versions of something. So it's always good to get some local input of knowledgeable people. You may want to do some snack or lunchtime surveys of our favorite foods. What do the kids like to eat? You're going to want to grow things that they're going to be excited to try eating. So asking the kids, what are some of the things that they enjoy eating? Thinking about what foods are important to your community and your families, right? You may find that in your community, they really like cooking foods that have a lot of spice and flavor. So you might want to look into some of the spicier peppers. You may want to look into some of the greens that have a really strong flavor. You may have, families that really like working with collard greens or peas or other kinds of legumes, or they're really into fruit. So it's good to kind of get some input from the community and the families about what are some of the products that they use the most and feel are very important to include in your program. There's also health considerations, right? You want to have plants that are hopefully low incidence for allergies. I'm never going to say no incidence. There are the occasional children that have a tomato allergy or a strawberry allergy, but thinking about which ones are less likely to be a health hazard, as well as, are the plants themselves tasty, but the leaves are really dangerous? You might not want that if you have a lot of kids that are going to be popping everything in their mouth. Are some of the plants really prickly? Are we worried about them, raspberries are great, but if you've got toddlers, you probably don't want them in the same area because there's a lot of thorns. So thinking a little bit about how to make sure we're picking healthy plants. And ideally, you want to start thinking about what we want to plant about a month or two before the earliest planting date. So if the first date that things are going to be going in the ground is as early as March, you should be thinking as early as February, so that you're planned out like, okay, well, not everything's getting planted in March, but we know we need this much space for what we're planting in March. So let's make sure we plant everything else around that. So you want to start this planning stage right about now, so that you can be thinking creatively. All right, so then you get into the actual planning stage. Let's plan our garden, right? Let's think about it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I do this every year because it changes, is I go on to some version of Farmer's Almanac or some local resource, and I say, what is the planting calendar for this year? When are you telling me that these seeds should be in the ground? And it's based on when, like previous years, when was the last frost, when was the first frost, and it's going to tell you should plant this plant in this range. It will say you should start this plant indoors here and then plant it outdoors here. I find that incredibly helpful because I don't remember these from year to year and it changes. So that's the first thing I do, is figuring out, when does everything need to get started indoors? What are the plants that you can't start indoors? When do they have to go outside? How do you get them ready? So that's a great place to get started. Because we have a shorter season, you definitely want to start any plant that is capable of being started indoors and transplanted indoors. The one that I think is most important for me is my freaking pepper plants. Peppers for me take forever to grow. I start them like February or March, and they still are like one of my slowest plants. Whereas things like sunflowers take no time at all to sprout and start growing. And if you start them early, they will get very leggy and then fall over. So you have to think a little bit, what do we need to start indoors? Some plants you really can't transplant, like carrots, do not transplant. Most of the underground plants are not going to be happy with that. So think about what you should start inside versus what you're going to go straight into the ground. You need to get your space ready for growing, right? If it's a brand new space, then the whole thing is all about, what am I putting in the ground? What kind of soil? How much compost? How much, of peat or vermiculite or something that's going to make the soil a little bit lighter? If it's an existing garden, you might have to turn over the soil, get out the weeds, remove any crop cover you put in. You're probably going to have to add some compost because every year you need to add more compost. You're going to want to think about, what am I starting from seed, or what's going to go in the ground straight as seeds, or what am I going to do with seedlings? Do I want to just buy some cucumber and tomato and pumpkin seedlings rather than starting from seeds? Do I need bulbs? If I needed bulbs, then I need to plant them back in the fall like I did with my garlic. Think about, what is this going to look like with my students? How am I going to plant with my children? What's going to be the best way? If you have a class of 25 students, it's probably not going to be your best bet to try to plant with all 25 of them at once. So that's a time when you're going to want your co-teacher to split up the group, or get a parent volunteer who can come in and work with half of your students, thinking about ways that you can kind of split up a little bit so that you can work in a small group. You may want to orient all the kids to the process before you even get outside. Make it a circle time activity. You told me you wanted these 3 plants. We're going to be planting this one today. Here's how we do it. Let's practice pinching and putting it in the ground and spacing it out. So you kind of front load it to make the process a little bit easier. And then, of course, as always, thinking about, how can we adapt the planting process and the planning process for young learners? So how can we get ready for that? All right. So now we get to do an activity, because I'm sure you're sick and tired of listening to me talk for a while. So this is one of my absolute favorite activities. I do this both with teachers and with students. I call it planning a dream garden. So we are going, sky's the limit, right? If you could design your garden however you wanted, whether that is your school garden or a garden you would like at home, what would it look like? This is something that I would do right about now with the kids to get them thinking. Right now it's dead of winter, but it's not going to be for long. We're going to be getting into that, and that's planning season. You could have each children envision their own dream garden. You could do it in a small group with a couple of kids at a time, or you could do it with the whole class and really create almost like a mural. I love to do this with seed catalogs, especially for younger kids that might not have the same level of representational drawing. And seed catalogs are free. Heaven knows, Burpee and Johnny send me a catalog every month for about 6 months of the year. So I save them up really quickly. So we have a ton of those, but it doesn't have to be. You don't need those to be able to use them. You can just give them drawing and coloring materials. For children and adults who prefer to write in words, you can literally just write the words of where you want everything. This can look like whatever you want it to look like. So the activity I'm giving to you is, what would your dream garden look like? School garden or home, either is fine. Hopefully you got my email ahead of time with your list of materials, but if you need to go grab something to write or draw with, by all means. And I would like to give you a solid 10 minutes to think about what your dream garden might look like. So I'm going to turn off my microphone, but I'll still be here if anyone needs help. And we will come back together at 6:55. And I'm hoping that some of you will at least share some of the ideas that you have, even though I know you can't share the pictures unless you want to put them in the chat. But go and design your dream gardens. And I can't wait to hear what you come up with. Um, There we go. If you don't mind sharing in the chat, either something that you were really excited about that you put in your dream garden, something that's special, some wish that you have that you could bring to your garden, that would be awesome. Pumpkins, says Jenny. Yeah, I love pumpkins. Oh, man, a successful three-sister garden. I wish. I have tried that one before, and I have not had a lot of success getting them to grow together. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But yes, a successful three-sister gardens with squash beans, and then the third being corn that you put together. That's a great garden bed to try to do. There may actually be some good resources um, on the various websites of certain local indigenous tribes, local to the area of New England. I don't know which ones might have it, but I do know that if there is a website, and I can look it up and send it out with the other ones that help you to identify which indigenous tribes were living in your area or continue to live in your area. And it might be nice to check out their actual websites to see if they have information and clues on how to be successful with the Three Sisters Garden. Kelly is excited to have pollinator flowers. Mass Audubon actually has an excellent website on pollinator flowers and which ones to plant for which seasons. So that's a great thing to add in. I see asparagus, Brussels sprouts, and eggplants. Very ambitious, Kelly. I will warn you, asparagus takes about 10 years to successfully grow. But Brussels sprouts and eggplants absolutely can be grown around here. And asparagus can too. You just have to be patient. Catherine wants trellising for beans, peas, and cucumbers. Hey, if you have a chain link fence at your play yard, you have perfect trellising for growing those kinds of things. Susan's talking about a victory garden with a mix of favorite vegetables and flowers. Wow. Look at all that. Zinnias, dahlias, cherry tomatoes, zooks, cucumbers, peppers. Sounds great to me. Sarah would love to have something in her garden that is growing for each season. Absolutely. Again, those growing charts that show when different seeds should be planted and when they produce would be a great thing for you to have. It is ideal to have a garden that is producing spring, summer, and fall because you can have constantly something that you're able to eat. That's a great goal. Meg would like to make the school garden more colorful, fun, and engaging. You grow a ton of root veggies, but they're not that exciting to look at. I hear you, Meg. Definitely. And the good news is there are colorful things that you can eat. So things like peppers, cherry tomatoes are very colorful. There's even some colorful flowers that you can eat, like calendula and nasturtiums are quite delicious and colorful. So you can definitely get some good color in your garden while eating. Um, so Katie is saying, what you love about gardens is rows and rows of bright, beautiful flowers and a wide variety of them in every color. Yeah, a rainbow garden would be amazing. Assortment of stones to surround the perimeter of the garden, even if the kids paint the stones too or have nice messages on them. Various fruits as well. Like to have a small bird feeder too, and an area for water. I would love to have a water feature in my garden. Would really tie it together. That's beautiful. I'd love to see that, Katie. Let's see, Lydia, in your dream garden, immersive structures for young kids to make little tents. Yes, I love those. If you've ever read The Sunflower House by Eve Bunting, the kids plant sunflowers in a circle and make a sunflower house, and it's so cute. It's a great book. But yeah, having any kind of like a teepee structure or kind of like a dome that you can have that have things growing up them is a really fun one. Carolyn would like families to be able to participate, like pumpkins in a raised bed, something that's easy for young children to water and care for. Absolutely. We'll talk about some of those easier ones. And would like to try and grow curry leaves. So I haven't ever tried that. I didn't know you could. Uh, Darshini, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. That would be really cool. If you learn how to do that, that would be awesome. And Abby was kind enough. She looked up the resource that I was talking about to help you identify which indigenous tribes are native to the areas in which you're living. And there is that link. So you can look that up and then maybe able to look for some good planting ideas for them for either three gardens or other plants that are original to where you're living that you could try to grow. Thank you so much, Abby. All right. So now if I do this activity with my children, I'm going to use that um, to kind of inform what are the kids excited about growing. The first year I did this, I was thinking all about things we can eat, and the kids were really, really excited to grow flowers. And so I didn't want to, deny them something that they felt so excited about. So we compromised. So we had you know, 4 or 5 beds of edible vegetables and fruits, and then we had one that was just flowers. We had one that had flowers that you could either eat or use for natural dyes, so there was still something beyond just the appearance of flowers. We selected some fruits and veggies that have very pretty flowers before they turn into fruits and vegetables. So by listening to the children and doing this garden planning, we were able to think about, well, what can we grow that the kids are excited about? Some of them wanted melons. I don't know if you've had luck growing melons around here. I have had no luck whatsoever. I've tried watermelons and cantaloupe. They get about the size of a tennis ball, and then my dog picks them. Or they just never get any bigger. So there are certain crops that your kids want you to grow, and you really try to make it work, and it doesn't happen, and that's okay too. But I think it's really important to give the children the opportunity to be part of the thought process because they're going to be that much more engaged and that much more exciting if it includes their ideas and what they want to be growing. All right. So thinking about the cafeteria piece and all of that, this may take many different forms in your program depending upon how you do food. You may have a full cafeteria with a cafeteria staff and food and nutrition staff, and it's all in their hands, and you haven't had the opportunity or the ability to necessarily request or add certain items to the menu, and that's okay. You may do no food service whatsoever at your school. You may be somewhere in between where your school provides snacks but not meals. So there's lots of different ways in which this might be part of your classroom. But cafeteria is anything that includes cooking or baking with the children, where you might create a snack or even a tiny taste test. The class that I did today on maple sugaring, the kids got to taste and compare maple syrup and pancake syrup, which for those of you in the know, pancake syrup is mostly corn. And we got to taste the difference and see which one they liked, which one they were familiar with, what was the difference, what was similarities. And it was very simple. It was a single dot of syrup on their finger, but even that is a cafeteria piece because there's that tasting going on. It might look like working with your cafeteria and nutrition staff to see if you can find sources of local or fresh fruit that food that you can add into the meals. Remember, just taking something out of a can and having it fresh from the ground is really going to increase the nutrition and the familiarity of the food and where it comes from. There's a big difference between, canned tomatoes and like an actual cherry tomato that goes in your salad, and kids can really see it and recognize what it is. It's important in the cafeteria piece that children are responsible for the raising, the harvesting, and the prepping of food, right? If they planted it and they harvested it and they washed it and they cut it and they ate it, right? It's that whole cycle. And for the record, children are much more likely to eat the food if they grew the food because now they're engaged in it. There's a huge number of community opportunities when it comes to cooking, having families share favorite recipes or come in and prepare foods with the kids, learning about different types of spice palettes and things that go together, things that children may be familiar with or not familiar with. There's just a lot of different ways that we can engage the community. It may involve with partnering with local farms that are nearby to get different ingredients that you need, or engaging with the families to get various recipes. And then there's also both cultural and health related issues around food. So anytime you cook, you need to consider any health concerns, any food and dietary restrictions, whether those are medical restrictions or cultural restrictions. I've lived my life with cultural food restrictions. I keep kosher. I've never had shellfish. I've never had pork products. I can't mix my dairy and meat. And it does make it a little more complicated when I'm engaged in cooking projects in school because there are certain things I can't eat or prepare. So having to be conscientious and respectful of all of those different areas there. All right, so how do we plan for success? And don't worry, this is only a little taste of how we plan for success. We have an entire workshop on how to actually cook and do food with children. This is just kind of to, no pun intended, whet your appetite. All right, so planning for success. So one of the big pieces is tools and safety orientation, right? If we're going to be cooking with kids, there could be sharp tools, there could be hot elements, there could be electricity, there could be all sorts of things that pose a potential safety risk. So we need to make sure that we properly orient our students to how we're going to use these tools, how do we use them safely, thinking about making sure that we have enough supervision and small groups so we can work with them. Sometimes it's about prep work. If I want to make this very much about the kids and what the kids can do and not have 15 children staring at me while I do something, then sometimes I have to prep ahead of time. With my Springfield school, I did a chocolate sweet potato spread, and ahead of time, I had already peeled and cooked the sweet potatoes, so the kids got to mash them and add the ingredients and stir and spread them on the crackers. But we didn't need any heat because I had already done it. So, sometimes it's about doing the prep work of the things kids can't do. So when you get there, everything is there's things that kids can do. It's how you introduce the activity, right? If you're introducing the activity when they're at the table with the ingredients and the tools, they're not going to hear a word you say because all they're going to be doing is grabbing everything. So I'm going to introduce the activity before we ever get to the table. I'm going to talk about what are the ingredients we're using? Where do they come from? What do they look like? What do they taste like? Have you seen them before? What are you predicting about what it's going to be like on the inside? What are the tools we're going to use? How is this going to look? So we definitely need to prepare kids before we bring them into the cooking setting. I like to talk to the kids. Where do the ingredients come from? Even things that we don't even think about, right? Salt. Where does salt come from? Right? Kids have no idea. Many adults have no idea. So let's talk to them. Where did the salt come from? Where did the cinnamon come from? Cinnamon is bark from a tree. People don't think about that, but it came from somewhere, right? It was grown or raised on some kind of farm or harvested. Our maple syrup, our honey, our eggs, all of these things are coming from harvesting, raising, growing. So it's important to think about, where did these all come from? To think about how much teacher involvement is there versus kid involvement. If the kids are watching me put a bunch of ingredients into a blender and blend them, that's not really them doing anything. That's them like watching a demonstration. I want the kids to be involved. I want to minimize what I'm doing and maximize what they're doing because it's going to be more impactful if they get to do it, right? Otherwise, it's just, watching someone cook. So I want to make sure that there's very little for me to do and everything for them to do. And then, of course, being respectful of any dietary restrictions. So, how do we make this a little less stressful? Well, first of all, extra hands for cleanups as you go. That's huge. You definitely want someone to start taking away all the things that are dirty so that you don't wind up with a giant mess. So, if possible, this can even be like a parent volunteer who might want to come in, or maybe even an alumni class student, or if you've got an extra director or a float going around. It's really helpful to have a second person to just kind of help with the cleanup. I recommend small groups, right? You don't want all the kids, I'd say at max half your class, doing this at once. Have them have training on the tools before they even get there. You can train the whole group at once and then remind them when they get to the table before you hand the equipment out. Definitely good supervision. You want recipes that are going to allow the children to participate. As I said before, this isn't about me cooking and them watching. This is about them doing the work. So what can I find that allows them to do things? And hopefully it's more than just every person gets to add one ingredient, which is a great start. But if you can have something where they're all active at once, like we're going to be making apple kale salad next week with my Springfield school, and all the kids are going to be ripping the kale leaves off the stems and ripping them into tiny pieces. They're going to love that because they're all getting to rip the heck out of the kale. The smaller, the better. So that's something they can all do at once. It's meaningful, it's fun, and they're not waiting forever for a turn to pour a little teaspoon into something. We want to try to highlight fresh produce and farm ingredients, right? I'm trying to use things that they would actually see as they're growing out of the ground rather than something that's coming out of a can or even something that's frozen or already prepared. So when I brought in the already peeled and cooked mashed sweet potatoes, I also brought in a raw one so they could see this is what it looks like, feel it, smell it, roll it around in your hands. Then I take out, this is what it looked like after I peeled and cooked it, and it's in chunks so that they could understand that where it actually came from. And we talked about it coming from underground. On the flip side of highlighting local fresh produce, you may want to bring things that are from further away if they are culturally relevant ingredients. So, maybe you are using things like you said, the curry leaves don't grow so well around here. So, the curry, if you're using it as a spice, might come from pretty far away, but that's okay if you want to highlight the ingredient as something that is really important and familiar to some of your class. Or you may want to use pineapple if you have students that are coming from more tropical regions, or coconut, or whatever it may be. It's okay to use some ingredients that aren't local if it's part of including your different communities and helping to share familiar recipes and flavors. And it's also important to discuss the why, what, and where of cooking. Why are we doing this? What are we making? What are the ingredients? Where did they come from? Right? So that it's not just here's a bunch of stuff and we're mixing it all together, but there's actually some lesson and learning going on behind it. See, we're getting some of that classroom piece in there as we're also doing the cafeteria. Oops, sorry. And then just talking about that diverse cooking piece, you're going to sound like a broken record, but I think it's really important. Think about the physical and cognitive needs of your group. What are they going to need to be able to be successful? Can you adapt a recipe to meet different needs? When possible, I try to find recipes that don't involve a lot of common allergies like dairy and eggs and nuts and all of that. But you can also adapt it, right? If you're doing a stone soup recipe and you want me to be able to eat it, then you can't be using chicken stock, but vegetable stock works just as well. Thinking about the different ways that we can adapt a recipe so that everyone can participate and enjoy. As I said, finding ways to highlight different cultural recipes or ingredients or flavors. You could take something that's very generic, like salad dressing, but based on the type of flavors and ingredients kids can add, it could take on very different flavor palettes based on different cultural seasonings, right? So everyone's making a salad dressing, but there may be different ingredients that reflect different cultures. Having either bringing the home into the school by having families share some of their favorite recipes, or sending home recipes that the kids have made for the families to try, right? Share some of those recipes that are important to your students. All right, so I already gave one of these away, but that's okay. We're going to think through a classroom scenario. So we're saying that, we're going to do something that I know a lot of schools do, that whole stone soup recipe around Thanksgiving, right? I know this is a very popular activity right now as a way of building community. So let's say that your school is planning to do a stone soup recipe, and every child is supposed to bring in an ingredient for the recipe. Once the kids bring in the ingredients, they'll all have a chance to cut the ingredients and make the soup. So let's say that in your class, you have 6 children with different considerations. So you have Uri, who keeps kosher and can't eat any products that have meat. Jake has fine and gross motor delays. Hiram just immigrated from Colombia. His family doesn't speak much English, and they aren't so familiar with some of the ingredients on the list that you're asking children to bring in. Kimmy has autism, which leads to some anxiety around trying new foods. Irene's family is on food stamps, and Jasmine has celiac disease and can't eat gluten products. So if this was your classroom of students and you wanted to make stone soup, what are some ways that you could ensure that all of these children could participate in the activity? And you can toss them up in the chat. So Jenny recommends that we have a list that the families can choose from. So a list of ingredients, and let the families choose which ingredients they're comfortable sending in. That's definitely a possibility. Include the parents in that. What else can we do to ensure that all of these children can participate? So Catherine has some extra ingredients on hand in case something that is brought in doesn't meet the criteria. Yeah, you definitely can do that. Um, Diwali, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, would go for buying the most that you can from the ingredient list by analyzing the different situations. Okay. Tell the class we're going to create a gluten-free vegetable soup. Absolutely. Ask the students, what ingredients do we think you need? Oh, I love, Carolyn, that you're including the children in deciding what they'd like to put in it. Absolutely. So a gluten-free vegetable soup, so using a vegetable base instead of a bone broth or a chicken base would ensure that Ori can eat it, right? A gluten-free soup, if you use something like rice or gluten-free noodle, you could do so Jasmine can eat it. Oh, I love that. Lydia says send it a Spanish translation of the ingredient list or the activity description. So that would ensure that Hiram might be successful. Um, or have them each send a list of what they think it could include, including their home ingredients. Yeah. So you could definitely, you could have, instead of handing a list to the kids, you could give pictures to the kids of what to bring in. So that might also help Hiram if he doesn't know the written word, to have a picture of it, or for you could offer to have Hiram send in one of his favorite soup ingredients, right? Doesn't have to be something on your list if there's a vegetable he likes to put in soup. Offer alternative sensory engagements to taste, like wafting the smell while cooking. Ooh, that's a good one, Lydia. I like that. Wafting in the smell might be more comfortable for Kimmy. Kimmy might be willing to, if there are certain vegetables in the soup that Kimmy likes, or if Kimmy likes them better when they're raw, then instead of having Kimmy eat the soup, you could give her some of the same ingredients separate from the soup that she might feel more comfortable eating. In terms of the fine and gross motor delays, for Jake, maybe instead of doing the cooking, maybe he does some of the pouring of the water or the stirring of the ingredients. You might be able to give him something that he could squeeze in a bag, or try to think of some of the other ones that he could do. Maybe he pours the pasta in, or the seasonings. Thinking about for Irene's family, if you're lucky enough to have your own garden, I would suggest letting Irene and her family go and harvest something from your own school garden that they could bring in, or perhaps offering to have them bring in something that you know they have in the house, like bringing in just a little bit of salt or pepper, rather than having to provide a vegetable. Any other ideas? I think that met most of our needs here. And I apologize, we have a visitor. He doesn't like being locked out. Awesome. So the main goal of this is, how can we make this soup such that no one feels left out, right? If it's a soup that has a vegetable broth, then everybody can eat it, right? It doesn't leave Uri out. It's not like you have to make a separate one. If you use rice instead of pasta, then Jasmine can eat it and doesn't need a separate soup. If the same ingredients that you're putting in the soup, some can be left raw, then Kimmy can eat the same thing. It's just set aside from the soup. So as many opportunities as you can have to make something that everyone can contribute to, rather than having to make 12 different soups, or setting something aside that's different, is going to encourage everyone and make them all feel like they're equal participants. So just thinking a little bit ahead and planning can really create a successful experience and ensure that all of the kids are really excited and feel like they're a part of it. All right, so moving into that community piece here. So, when we bring in that community element, we can connect to the community in so many different ways. And again, when I say community, I'm not just talking about your preschool community and the families involved with that, but I'm referring to your entire local community, whether that's local farmers, local sellers, volunteers, people who are interested in gardening, people who might want to volunteer their time to build raised beds, 4-H students, all kinds of different ideas of people who are nearby, even your local library, right? That you mentioned with seed swaps and things like that. You want to be able to work with the families, both to learn about some of their cultural food traditions, and also to share ways to help bring healthy and cultural relevancy to the recipes in schools. You may have a very particular menu at your school that doesn't reflect the recipes and the types of foods that some of your students are eating. So how can we think creatively to ensure that all of the children are seeing their homes and their culture reflected within your food choices? So being thoughtful about that, and really, asking the family to share with you, so that you're making sure that it is important to what they're looking for, and kind of matching their hopes for their children. Connecting with local farmers and producers of fruits, vegetables, eggs, dairy, honey, maple syrup, whatever you may have in your area. There's lots of different opportunities to connect with those that are actually producing the food, which is amazing. And then, looking into local resources for support, anything from, grocery stores that might donate foods or materials, local ag schools that may have students that would like to volunteer some time and come and teach you and help you get your garden up and running. Thinking about grocery stores and beekeepers, and even things like local hardware stores may have additional leftover lumber that they wouldn't mind donating. So getting a little creative and thinking about who in your community can help support your goals for farm to early childcare. So these are just a couple different community events we've had in some of my programs. And, for us, it's, thinking about all of these fun, different things that we do in our classroom, everything from, in the far upper left-hand corner, we were making a potato leek soup The kids had done all the chopping and the mixing and the ingredients, and now they're all sitting safely on the rug while our farm coordinator is heating and mixing the soup. Then next to that photo, we have one of our teacher naturalists on site. We're lucky enough to have a lot of staff, is actually tapping a maple tree. And all of the kids get a chance to do some drilling. And then she taps the metal spile. All the kids get to taste the sap as it drips out. We check the buckets every day. We go to visit the evaporator. So we really got to work a lot with some of our local staff doing that. Sometimes it's super simple. We just had, out in our play yard, we set up a little picnic bench with play food, and the kids kind of set up their own little community picnic. You can do this with real food too, obviously, but a picnic, eating outside, having opportunities to kind of come together as a class is a lot of fun. And then on the far right and then the lower left, these are some of the community events that we do in class where the families can join and the kids prepare a snack to share. Usually something from our garden. So we've done strawberry shortcake parties where the children cut up the strawberries and make the whipped cream. We've done apple crisp parties where they make the crisp. We've also done pancake parties where we use local maple syrup. So this is just, another nice opportunity where we've come together to kind of share a meal with our students and our families. So I'd love, we'll do this in the chat instead of with a neighbor, but just kind of if you have an event that you've done at your program that's kind of a community farm to school event, I'd love it if you would toss it up in the chat. Maybe it involves food, maybe it's something else around gardening. I'd be interested to hear. And then if you have any new ideas for how you could include some more diversity and inclusion into that, great. If not, no worries. But let's hear from you all. What are some community events you've done around farm to school? So Ariel sends, we run a summer camp. Each week, the children harvest and cook using your fresh eggs and produce and sell it on Thursday to the families at the pickup for farm stand. That is amazing. The money goes back in the camp scholarships. Ariel, when you say that you harvest and cook the fresh eggs and then sell them, you sell the eggs when they're cooked. You make a meal that they buy, or you sell the fresh eggs and the produce uncooked. Curious. Catherine says, you'd like to set up an end of the school year farmers market. I think that's amazing. I've heard of a couple of programs that have been able to do that, and I think that's a super great idea. And you can even have the kids, come up with, some recipes that they might like to share. Like, if you're selling peppers, maybe somebody's got a favorite recipe involving peppers, and you can have that as a suggestion that they can grab when they do some buying at the farm stand. That'd be really neat. The kids can also make the signs for the farm stand, which would be adorable. You sell the eggs and the fresh produce that's harvested. Oh, okay, I got you. So you cook with the eggs with the kids, but then you're selling the fresh eggs and the produce. That's awesome. I love that idea. And the fact that it goes to help support the camp scholarships, that's genius. I have to say, our children love it when they get to take care of the chickens, and they get so good being around them. It's really sweet. All right. Nancy shares that families are asked to sign up for weeks to water, weed, and tend the school garden through the summer. Great idea. That's definitely my recommendation if you are a 9-month program. They're invited to harvest whenever ready. So then they can, help themselves. Love it. Love to have an event to bring volunteers together to teach the tasks. Weed identify. Yes, that is a clever idea. So, you have families coming up during the summer to do watering and weeding and tending, and then they can harvest whatever's ready. But to have someone come in and teach them at the beginning of the summer how to do that is a really good idea. I would certainly suggest reaching out if you have a local agriculture school or a community college or state university to reach out and see if they have any students that would be interested. There may also be some horticulture clubs or garden clubs in your area, sometimes 4-H. You may be able to find a student or even a parent or two volunteer that are passionate gardeners might be willing to dedicate some time to do that. Sometimes even your staff do it. Lydia, for a home connection, you started tomato plants in newspaper folded pots. I love that. In the classroom that the kids could bring home to plant in pots or gardens at home over the summer. It's a really sweet idea. I like that one a lot. And then today you had some parents come in to talk to the class about Lunar New Year. That's great. And share some of the traditional foods at snack time. That's great. We had a family do that once a couple years ago, and that was a really special event for us. I love having families come in to talk about some of their family traditions around various observations and things like that. My children, their birthdays in the spring. I have twins, and their birthday often falls on the Jewish holiday of Purim. And so their very first year in kindergarten, it like felt right on it. And so the kids brought in Hummentaschen as a special treat for their birthday. And those are triangular shaped cookies with jelly inside that you eat on Purim. So I love when you can kind of include some of that for the classrooms. All right. Well, feel free to toss some more in there, but I love all the different ideas that you have. All right. Food and eating and cooking, it really unifies us all because we all eat, right? And yet there's so many unique elements to the foods that we eat, the way that we prepare them, the way that we eat them with our families, with our friends, the way that we share. So it's just such a great unifying feature that we can use to develop so much curriculum around. So, what I would like us to do, and this is the last activity before we wrap up for the evening, is to do a food memory activity. So, hopefully, you can grab a sheet of paper. You do not have to be an expert artist at this, but the general idea is you're going to hold the paper so the long edges are at the top and the bottom. So, basically, you know, holding it like this, and you're going to kind of fold like this. They have it actually folded up a little bit. You can do it either way. But you're going to draw your face such that your forehead is on the top flap and your mouth is on the bottom flap. And then what you're going to do after you've drawn the face is you're going to open up the fold. And in the mouth part, you're going to draw a special food that holds a certain memory for you, some kind of, whether it's something that you always ate on a special holiday or one of your beloved family members taught you how to do it, or it's a family recipe handed down. You'll draw a picture of it on the folded down mouth part. And then in the folded up forehead part, you're going to write a few words about how that food makes you feel or why it's special to you. And again, no points for drawing here, so it can be as stick figure-ish as you like. But I'd like to give you, let's say I'll give you about 10 minutes to draw this, and then we'll come back and we'll see if anyone would like to share their food story. So again, I'm going to put my mute on, but I'll be here if you have questions. And then we'll share at 7:40. Yes, I can show how to fold that again. So, whoops. So it's kind of folded. They have it more like an accordion so that when you pull it up, you can see, but it's also totally fine with me if you just want to fold it so that the two edges come up towards the middle, have the face like this, and then lift up the forehead and lift down the mouth. Thank you so Abby's on it. Thank you, Abby. All right. Would anyone like to share their food memory with us? No pressure if you don't. I will share my favorite food memory is of making borscht, a chilled beet soup. Now, my family is, in fact, actually from Eastern Europe, the Russia, Polish area. But I'm pretty sure the recipe they came up with was actually pretty Americanized because it's pretty different from all the Russian versions of borscht I've had. But I did learn it from my grandfather, who was born in Kiev, and I learned it straight from him, and it became kind of my recipe that I made for the family. It was actually the last food that he had when he was dying in the nursing home. So it was very special. And now my daughter has learned how to make it, and now she's the official borscht maker. So to me, that's a very special recipe for us. I love it. Jenny saying eating raspberries from your grandmother's garden. That sounds tasty. And tomato sandwiches from your grandfather's tomatoes. Come on over to your house. My grandparents were farmers as well, and I remember both their tomatoes and their raspberries, as well as their apples, which was their specialty. Ooh, fresh picked blueberries from the local blueberry farm. Now you guys are making me hungry for dessert. I have to go get some, some fresh fruit after this. Salsa with ingredients from the garden. Yum, Catherine. Oh, here we go. Dutch babies. I think I've heard of that. Yorkshire pudding with your mom, and it puffs up in the oven. That sounds really cool, Lydia. And then Kelly shares apple dumplings, whole cored apples with butter, cinnamon, and sugar inside. The apples covered in a homemade pie crust and baked. Oh, that sounds really good. Okay, maybe this is a bad idea. It's making me hungry. But these are awesome. Thank you all for sharing some of your special food memories. Lots of cabbage in your Polish grandparents' house. Well, that's good. Yeah, funnily enough, we didn't do a ton of the cabbage. It was all about the beets. Carolyn, a food memory, being together with family, intergenerational cooking. Children can slow us down in the kitchen, but that's the point. Slowing down, paying attention, and thanking Mother Earth and the farmers. That's beautiful, Carolyn. Thank you. Narissa says, your favorite milk fish soup with vegetables from the Philippines. That's neat. I'm not familiar with that. Sri Lankan fish curry. Ooh, wow. Very cool recipes here. Love it. Feel free to keep putting them up in there. I'm gonna make sure that we have enough time to finish up, but I'm loving all these great recipes and food memories you're sharing. All right. So I always like to remind us when we're doing farm to school, I think the tendency is to get rather hung up on vegetables and to a slightly smaller extent fruit when we think about gardening. But gardening and farming and growing is so much more than just vegetables and fruit, especially beyond those that grow in the garden. Yes, bread and butter pickles sounds delicious. So especially right now, as I said, I just did a maple sugaring lesson. This is the time of year in New England where we have a very special local product that really can only be made in very small parts of the world, which is maple syrup and maple sugar, because we have just the right climate for it and the right kinds of trees. So maple sugaring is a farm product. We have maple sugar farms in New England all over the place. Thinking about orchards and vineyards, right? Most of the fruit we grow actually comes from trees, if we're thinking of fruit by the definition of a sweet plant, as opposed to the scientific definition, fruit from a pollinated flower. But thinking about apples, peaches, plums, apricots, you know, avocado, all of those are coming from trees, right? And vineyards, of course, for grapes. Thinking about wool craft and felting, right? Wool products and other fiber arts such as alpaca, angora, which comes from rabbits, cashmere from goats, hemp, which is a plant, cotton, silk, all of these are raised on various types of farms, right? Grains and baking. Grains, even though we almost never grow them on, school gardens, right? That's a huge thing of what we grow and eat in this part of the world. So thinking about all the different grains that we consume and baking with them. I know many schools shy away from discussions around meat and where it comes from, but unless you're, not a meat eater at all, if you're a vegetarian, like meat is part of our diet and it's something that comes from various farms or fisheries, and all of those. So thinking about where the meat comes from, where does our dairy come from? Where do our eggs come from? Fishing is sometimes it's farm based, right? There are aquaponics and different kinds of, fisheries and hatcheries, but even the foraging technique of fishing wild fish and using that as part of your food. And then thinking about the drying and canning and other forms of preserving is also a really good topic when addressing farming and farm to school. So a couple more resources here, and some of these will be included in the handouts that you get after this. But thinking of ways to do farm to school in a way that doesn't break the bank, because we know, especially in early ed, there isn't a ton of extra money for spending. There are ways to do this either free or extremely discounted. So, reaching out to local greenhouses for any additional or leftover seed that they have, or seedling donations, especially towards the end of the seedling season. It's always a nice idea to check it out and see if they have anything they can donate or sell you on the cheap. Reaching out to various lumber yards and hardware stores to see if they have either discounted or free lumber. I know some people have collected free old wood pallets and turned those into gardens. See if maybe you could get some of those for materials. As I said before, reaching out to agriculture students at any local colleges or universities. I have met several beekeepers. Every single one of them that I have met loves talking about beekeeping and is more than happy to wax eloquent on all the finer points of it and show you all their gear. So I highly recommend looking for some local beekeepers and seeing if they'd be willing to come to your school and show some of the different tools they use and talk about it, because so many of the ones I've met just love to talk more about it and to really share all of their incredible information. 4-H clubs often are happy to volunteer some time and engage with schools and talk about it. Eagle Scouts, right? If children are becoming Eagle Scouts, they usually have some kind of big project, and that's actually how we got our garden beds built. So an Eagle Scout fundraised the money to get the materials and then came in and built it all for us, and that's how we got our garden. So that's a really great way to get some amazing product out of that. And then, as I said, sometimes you can reach out to grocery stores and maybe they'll offer tours, maybe they'll donate unsold product. I think it's really great if you can take the kids for a field trip around the grocery store and learn a little bit more about where some of their food comes from. Certainly, you can reach out to local farms and farmer markets and grocery stores to see if they have any unused product that they can sell. So you can get some of those materials as well. And then, as I mentioned before, so many great resources online that have lots of great curriculum ideas, support around procurement, for talking to school and nutrition staff or talking to policymakers, everything from Shelburne Farms, Island Grown Schools, Growing Minds, Mass Farm to School, of course, has incredible resources. So there's a lot out there. Don't feel like you have to write this all down. I swear I'll send it out to you with all the links. I just want to make sure that you keep in mind that there is a lot out there to support you as you're starting or building or growing your farm to school program. So for those of you who are coming next week, and don't worry if you're not, I do like to kind of give you a thought activity to think about for next time. I'd love for you to just take a few minutes when you join us next time to kind of share a little bit, what did we do today? See if you can bring up any memories of that. Why was that important to you? What did you take away from it that was meaningful to you? And then to think, now what? So how could you use that? How could you use something you learned today to build your work or to do something differently? So, this is kind of your homework, but again, no pressure if you don't do it, but just to kind of get you thinking and processing a little bit of what we discussed today and thinking about how you might apply some of this into your school system. So lastly, I like to always include a few resources from Mass Audubon ourselves, because there is a whole host of resources that we offer, both within farm to early childcare and with nature-based learning. So just to let you know about what's out there, at Mass Audubon, we have a whole host of nature-based and garden-based trainings. This obviously is our Kids in the Garden series, but we have everything from all kinds of water curriculum to inside and outside with nature, which is kind of your intro to how do I get outside with kids? How do I bring some nature learning into my classroom? How do I deal with the weather? And then we have a very special series called Natural Connections. And each workshop in the series looks at a different area of preschool curriculum and how you can do it with a nature-based spin on it. So what does nature-based math look like? What does nature-based social and emotional learning look like? So by all means, check out our website and see some of those offerings. We also do customized training if there's a particular topic that you're excited about. In fact, this whole training came about because a group of educators said, hey, there's nothing like this out there. Can you do this? And that's kind of how this came about. So we love to create custom trainings based on the needs of the schools. We have our Nature Smart books. These are some really fun nature activity books for kids. I'm one of the main authors. There's 2 books right now that focus on ages 4 to 6-year-old. We also have 7 to 9 and 10 to 12. And it's a whole mix of activities, including scavenger hunts that get kids outside, science activities, some math and language and literacy. And then they all have nature hero activities. So things that you can do with young kids that actually make a difference and help nature. So we really love those. We do site visits where we come and visit your school. You kind of show us your outdoor space and we hear from your staff about how they're currently using it, what works really well and what's challenging. And then we create a completely customized report for you about how you can use your existing resources and space to do more nature or garden-based learning. We can support schools with curriculum coaching and consulting. If all of this sounds amazing to you, that's our SEEDS program. It's basically the whole thing, everything from PDs and trainings, demo lessons in the classroom, teacher professional developments, training, consulting, all of that. So happy to talk with you further about that. And then in terms of free resources, we have a quarterly early ed newsletter. I only send it out 4 times a year, I swear. But I put in it seasonal curriculum ideas that you can do in your classroom. And then any place where we're going to be presenting on early ed that you could come and join us. So for example, I posted about this on it last week. We're going to be presenting at the the National Science Teacher Association conference in March. So if you want to stay connected and know about where else to find us, that's a great place. You can sign up on our website, and I'll send that link as well. And then finally, we have on the Mass Audubon website 4 free STEM-based units for early educators that you can download free of cost in English or Spanish. And they cover trees, birds, weather, and soil. So you can download those. We have our Young Explorer pages, which are some curriculum idea pages. We have nature bingo cards that we change by the season that you can use with kids getting outside, and some nature play videos. So you can see what it looks like when you actually get outside with children. So please do check out our website, see some of those amazing resources. Thank you all so much. Here is the way you can get in touch with me is our email. If you have 2 minutes to quickly fill out our professional development survey, it just helps us at Mass Audubon know how we can better serve your needs and interests as educators. So we really appreciate if you take the time to fill it out. If not, no worries. But thank you all so much. I really hope to see you at one of our later workshops. Again, we have 3 more coming up the next 2 Wednesdays, and then we take a break for February vacation week, and we have 1 more the week after that. But other than that, thank you all so much. I'll stick around for any questions, and I'll pass it back over to Abby in case she has anything else to share.
Yes, thank you. And apologies, there's some background noise in here while my 4-year-old just relocated to the room. But I'm putting a link into the chat for the additional Mass Farm to School calendar resources, including if you've participated in this session today and want to sign up for the rest, links to those will be in that, as well as if you want to share with your colleagues to get some of them to come to this kind of PD, we would love to have them join. So look out for that in the chat. And thank you again, Rena. Really fabulous presentation. And thanks to all of you who were here late on a school night when we know you all have early mornings as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you to all the educators because I know how long your days are. All right, everyone get a good night rest and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you all. I'll stop recording.